One of Mike's colleagues in Lafayette, Roger Peak, sent us an email in our newly forming coalition with the definition of captured agency, as though that's really what transportation is it's an industry that has captured government oversight, and the industry and the engineers, everybody's interest is supported by each other in this captured agency environment. I thought that really does describe it. If I explain that well enough, but it was a whole paragraph describing the problems with captured agency, and it really makes it hard for us to get good outcomes if we're having to, as citizens, try to stand up against all the power and money and everything that is determined to do this project. It kind of explains why it sounds like, Mike, y'all have participated as citizens in their process, believing that it would be just and fair. And I have to ask you, after all this time, do you feel like their process is just and fair?
Well, absolutely not.
I've got a thought or a question for you, Mike, is if you were talking to Secretary Buttigieg, what would you say to him, or what would you ask him to do for Lafayette?
Well, I would ask him to think about our community and the people that live in our community, and how disruptive this plan has been for all these years, 3 decades now, that there's been a plan to put an interstate through our city. And that has meant that there is just no development. People don't want to buy houses in the proposed route. The price of houses has dropped along the proposed route because nobody wants to live near an interstate. And I would ask him to just end this project, allow us to change the project. It's an authorized interstate highway project, and that's a reason that DOTD wants to do it. They get good matching from the federal government on an authorized project. There's a plan to build a bypass around Lafayette, which is called the Lafayette Expressway, and it would go to the west of Lafayette. There have also been proposals to build a bypass to the east, and there's been some consideration of building a bypass, actually a loop around the entire city. And the people with the Lafayette Expressway have looked into that. The bypass would actually cost no more for 30 miles of bypass. It would cost no more than the 5.5 miles that we have for going through the middle of the city. It would save our city so much to have that bypass built. And they've been working on it ever since it looked like the I-49 connector through Lafayette was a dead project in the early 2000s. They began working on the plans for the bypass. And it's been, at one time, strongly supported by our local city leaders. But now that DOTD has decided that they instead want to re-energize this old authorized project for the I-49 connector, which has exceptionally good cost sharing. That's the project they want to do because it has more federal money in it than the other project. So if I was to ask the federal Department of Transportation, I would ask them to be flexible with how the cost sharing formulas are used, and allow us to move our authorized project to the bypass.
That's really good. you'd almost think it, with the current policy direction of the Biden administration and Secretary Buttigieg, that they would entertain reversing that incentive to do cost sharing that de-incentivized running over cities and incentivized options that were going to help, like a loop. And Shreveport's fortunate. We've already got a loop, but we've got, and maybe that's part of the driver we haven't understood, is that this cost share match is such that that's really driving their reason to want to do the project that we don't need. Interesting information.
Yes, when John Bell Edwards came into office, there was a transition committee that was appointed that was mostly contractors, Department of Transportation contractors. And the recommendation was to select and promote projects which require the least amount of share from Louisiana to build the projects. So projects, these old authorized interstate projects, have the most beneficial cost share from the state's perspective. So this is exactly what the contractors said that Governor Edwards should do, and unfortunately, it is the guidance that he's been taking as he leads the Department of Transportation.
That's something. Well, I guess the governor slipped in a speech in Shreveport when he came up to Shreveport to cut the ribbon on the interchange of I-49 north of the city with the loop. He made the slip of saying I-49 through Shreveport is complete. And we had our little celebration over that, because we thought he's absolutely right. It is complete. It's connected. There is no gap, because the loop connects I-49 south of the city with I-49 north of the city. But he was soon corrected. The next time he came up to town, I guess that same group of contractors leaned on him and said, "Don't say that. We want the inner city."
Well, and there's always fine print on all of their, no build is always an option, Kim. In our case, we have 4 options that run through Roosevelt's old stomping grounds. And then we have one that is the loop, and they'll say, and no build's always an option, but they don't cost that out and say, well, that would cost 0. And you guys that want to save money, we should just leave it alone. So I don't know if you guys need to get on that a little bit stronger. It doesn't go anywhere, so why build it? You know,
I've actually seen them do what you just did at a public meeting where they almost muffled their hands.
Yeah. Because once 49 gets through Shreveport, and I say it is already, but once it goes all the way to Texarkana, Arkansas's not got anything on the drawing board to build it north from Texarkana. It's just not even being talked about. They're spending their money on education in Arkansas, and I think the business community is getting pretty frustrated with them that they're blowing it all on education when they could be building highway through basically kind of a very sparsely populated area of the state that isn't well served with education or highway infrastructure. It's a sad thing to think about, but yeah, it could be finished as early as 2039. That's a good question. I ask every year, what year do you think we can drive? Everything went really well. And they'll think, well, you know, if it went really smoothly, we could drive on it in 17 years. Well, now that's window keeps shifting. It's up to 2039 at the best possible outcome to drive on it. And yet, with no action any further than Texarkana, where does it go? We could go from Texarkana down to Lafeyette right now without stopping. So what's the rush to build any more when we got so many roads we could be taken care of and bridges in Louisiana that are crumbling that we can't afford to keep up. I don't see what the hurry is.
I mean, you look at Texas and how Texas is using already established routes to build I-69. You know, yeah. I-69 is actually going to circumvent Shreveport. You know, Texas has gotten to the point that they don't even wait. They're not waiting to build go through cities and towns. They're actually building on already existing state routes and highways, state highways, to build out I-69. And, you know, it just, that's why just look at how Texas is doing it, and they're getting it done by not reinventing the wheel, right? Why do we have to go through a neighborhood, build a whole new route when we already have a route that is already built?
That goes through a neighborhood somewhere, right? Yeah, they found, Mike, you may not know that the COG here, Council of Governments, found 17 million extra dollars left over from other projects. So they swept it all up into one big pile and decided to build one feeder road, one service road for a proposed route for I-69. So we're building a $17 million one side of the highway just so we can demonstrate how much we would really love to have I-69 come through Louisiana and go. Actually, don't tell O. Walker, I don't think it'll happen. Mayor Walker in Bossier really wants to build a highway through I-69 through Bossier City, and it's not going to happen. But he did convince them to build that service road for one side of the proposed route, and it's still on the agenda. They're working on it. $17 million. We can't keep the bridges repaired, but they got $17 million to build a feeder road to nowhere.
I know, right? It's Jimmy Davis Bridge is about to tip over and break in half, and we can't even
right.
We can't even finish. We can't even fix the bridges we have.
That would buy the paint, at least, to paint the old rust up on that bridge. They won't consider it because they got to have this this little demonstration to show to plant a flag, as Mayor Walker said, to plant a flag and show Texas we mean business about I-69 through Louisiana. And that's kind of the mindset, it seems, of government these days, is the highway or no way. We have to have more highways. And I don't get it because it doesn't bear out in any studies.
Now, Mr. Waldon, I have a question for you. What alternatives does Y-49 propose? Is it no build alternative? Is it build somewhere else? What alternatives are Y-49 proposing?
Our DOTD claims there are no alternatives, that the only route that meets the requirements is the one that they've selected, and that because the EIS and the project was approved back in 2002, because it was approved, they no longer have to consider a no-build alternative. That now the only alternatives they have to consider are things like, will the pilings be circular or elliptical? And those are the kind of things they talk about in public meetings. What kind of art would you like under the interstate? Those are the kind of decisions that they claim are left. They say that they're under no legal obligation to consider any alternatives.
Yeah,
that's the history of the interstate. I mean, there was an NPR story talking about a wealthy African-American neighborhood in Los Angeles last week. I guess it was another one that Roger shared with us. And, they had the money to go to court to win the right to settle in this predominantly white neighborhood. and they were doctors, lawyers, professional people. And but then when DOT came, they had no recourse. They just, and so the neighborhood, as they described it, was erased. But have y'all ever discussed the idea of a business boulevard, like the alternative that we advocate for, but have yet to get on the table in Shreveport?
Oh, yes. There's been a really great deal of talk about that. The proposed route goes along a highway called Evangeline Thruway, and that highway was built in the 1940s, and much of the business along it has now deteriorated, I think, to a great extent because of plans for the interstate. There's been what was described in one newspaper article here, that the neighborhood is rotting because nobody wants to do anything in that neighborhood with the specter of having an elevated interstate going over it. So we have the Evangeline Thruway, and there have been plans, and there was even a grant to look at what might be done with Evangeline Thruway after the interstate is built to improve the Evangeline Thruway. Unfortunately, there's really no money for that. They did find money for planning what we might do, but there's no money for actually doing it. And we would love to see the Evangeline Thruway improved with traffic circles and other new things. If they would build a bypass and get the trucks off the Evangeline Thruway, it would be a much more pleasant place to drive.
Well, that's good to know, because we're advocating we've been advocating that business boulevard approach that is just a fraction of the cost of the 3.5 mile freeway that they want to build, and it just makes so much sense. And we feel like that under the National Environmental Protection Act, they should consider it, because that's a requirement to consider all reasonable alternatives. And we feel it's a reasonable alternative. And it's another reason that we've contracted with Norm Marshall. Norm can do the traffic modeling to show that the boulevard stands up very well and maybe better than the freeway connector. So I'm glad we can align in that desire for our communities, and we can all turn to Amy Stelly, who said, if you want to see what this is going to look like, just come visit Claiborne Avenue and see what the elevated freeway has done there. So it's not like we have to imagine the outcome. We know the outcome, and why we can't do the DOT is hard to understand.
Mike, I heard that they've actually, that DOTD has right of first refusal on the Evangeline Thruway properties. That if I owned property along there, I used to drive that all the time. And a friend in Lafeyette told me that part of the reasons it's such a shambles is that the DOTD gets the right of first refusal if you want to sell your property, and they don't pay very well. So people hold on to it, but they don't invest in it because they wouldn't get their money back out of it. So they're kind of creating their own mess down there and doing it to you instead of for you guys. I thought, gosh, this is so nice to drive straight off of 49 and slow right down into Lafeyette, but on either side of the road, it's just terrible. And somebody said, well, the DOTD gets to buy it at their price if they want to, so nobody wants to sell it to them, and thus they don't reinvest in the property and it goes to pot. I'm so sorry that's that way, because that's just horrible in an otherwise wonderful city to visit. And I used to visit all the time when my kids were playing soccer down there. And what a great city, but what a mess right there along Evangeline.
Yeah, I mean, you would. I read somewhere else that a interstate only pays taxes once, but people pay taxes every year. So what would you rather have? A house full of people that's paying taxes, right, of many kind, or do you want an interstate that once it's built, that's it? That's it. That land is not, all it's going to be for the rest of your time is just a road, paying no taxes. You get no money from that thing. So
then you have to rebuild it in about 30 or 40 years too.
I know, right?
It decays, not weather.
Yeah. So
yes, and one of the problems here in Lafayette, and I imagine it would happen in Shreveport, is induced population movement. So if they build that connector into Lafayette, I think many people will abandon the city and move out of the city. Taxes in the city are higher than they are if you move just into the parish surrounding the city. And with an interstate going through, who wants to live near an interstate? So our property tax base is really going to be negatively affected by having an interstate going through the city that allows people to commute out to places that pay less property tax and get out of the city. And so it's going to be very, very bad for the city.
Yeah,
definitely.
I-49 has done exactly what you described for Shreveport. It has created that induced demand and stretched our city to 120 square miles. And we are now finally waking up to the fact that we can't afford the infrastructure that we built, and things are falling apart. It's predictable.
Yeah. And I think we're going to have to end it right here. We are so happy to have Mr. Waldon on with us today. Thank you for coming out with us. And thank you, Kim and John, for coming and being a part of this discussion about Lafayette and finding out about the freeway fighters down to Lafayette. Hopefully we can have Mr. Roger Peak and Harold Scheffler on, and we can dive a little more deeper into the going-ons of Lafayette and try to point the people to ways that they can help out. How can someone help out? If they see this, listen to this podcast, and see this podcast on YouTube, how would somebody get a hold of Y-49 and try to offer their help?
Well, you can go to our Facebook page, which has a convenient URL. It's y-49.org. And from there, you can see we have a petition people can sign. You can keep up with the latest things that are happening on I-49.
All right, great. So I will make sure that I put that URL with the on the podcast website and also on the YouTube page. But once again, I want to thank you, Mr. Walt, for hanging out with us today and talking with us about Lafayette. Hopefully one day we can come down there and enjoy some of that great Arcadian food and get acquainted with the great weather down there down in Arcadia, and check everything out. So thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
All right. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, John. We'll definitely get together again.
Everybody like our podcast. Find our podcast and like it, and write a nice review too. That'll help us get a bigger audience. Thanks so much for having me, Roosevelt. It's been great to see you guys.
Yeah, oh yeah. We John, we had to keep doing it, man.
Let's do it one more time.
There you go. So,
number 2.
Everybody, like John said, everybody like, subscribe, comment, help us out on YouTube. Everybody listen to the podcast at all the favorite places that you can listen to the podcast. Just search for Allendale Strong. Also, you can also catch our videos on Facebook now. We're starting to upload them on Facebook, so check them out on Facebook. If you don't feel like going to YouTube, or you don't feel like putting up our podcast or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, any other place, then you can check us out on Facebook also. So thank you everyone for listening. God bless and have a great day.